Zero Trust Networking with Aaron Palermo.
The Azure DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results. They are hiring architects and .NET engineers also who'd like a path to become an architect. So you can go to clearmeasure.com/careers to get more information on that. My guest today, a repeat guest back from episode 18. And our guest is Aaron Palermo. And yes, he is my older brother, and he's a DevOps engineer, solution architect, and all-around cybersecurity expert. He works for a global cybersecurity service company, is a member of the Cloud Security Alliance, and is a co-author of the up-and-coming Software Defined Perimeter Specification version 2. And he's recently spent a year and a half overseas supporting the Army with technology, and moved back to the U.S. last year to join Appgate as a senior solutions architect. Aaron, welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
Thanks. Good to be back.
Absolutely. We won't go into various recent family reunion stuff. We're going to stick with technology here. But for those who haven't gone back to episode 18 and learned about software defined perimeters, I'd recommend just going back in the archives and pulling up show 18 and doing that. But for folks who did not listen to that, or maybe haven't heard you speak, or your other podcast interviews, because in your area of this vast technology industry, you're a pretty high up expert there. Just before we get into the zero trust networking, what are the key career events that have kind of been formational and leading you to working on this type of thing?
I'd say I just really enjoy networking, really enjoy cryptography. Have a background in that, have quite a bit of experience. And then this is really the merging of network, cybersecurity, cryptography, secure access. And, since last time, it's about 3 years. Zero Trust is really growing up, getting a bigger name for itself. It's not really just it might still be a buzzword, but it's got presidential attention. It's got the attention of several federal agencies, and a lot of the cybersecurity community is really adopting the concepts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, the audience for this podcast is mostly, almost exclusively programmers, people who are writing software. And in your past, you worked kind of serving a whole lot of programmers as you were in charge of the entire network for the computer science department for Texas A&M University. Just overall, in your observation, programmers focus on the software. What types of things have you observed that programmers don't typically gravitate towards, but they need to give some attention to in just the overall IT and security space?
Man, that's a tough question. I would say external integration is probably something that developers do well, but that integration has typically been focused on integrating with other applications. What I really have seen in the past couple of years is API access, not just to applications, but also to security suites, which is outstanding. So, I've been able to use products, and with the product APIs, with other application APIs, integrate to a significantly higher extent than I was, say, 2 to 3 to 4 years ago. Because at this point, it's not go in and click a GUI or go into a command line and configure a switch. You really can extend that DevOps pipeline to infrastructure. I'm sure you've heard infrastructure as code.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you do some of that. And I think that's an area for classically people who are focused on computer science and DevOps for writing programs, where they can extend their influence into infrastructure as code, into architecture, into automation, and really being able to tie things together that they were going to have a much harder time tying together in the past. They might have to talk to a network administrator or a Windows administrator to get a change made. But as the APIs grow and they're more extensible and they're more integrated, especially with enterprise identity and service accounts and being able to store secrets securely, it's really lending itself to a lot of integration that I think they can leverage.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right. Well, let's get into the main topic here: zero trust networking. What can you help us understand what that is for people who maybe don't really know what it is, and then what the current state of it is?
Absolutely. So think of the classical VPN. If you connect to a VPN, you can get access to a network. Say it's a /24, or say, when you connect to a VPN, you have access to the entire network. Mm-hmm. There could be firewall rules in place, but typically when you connect to a virtual private network, you're connecting to just that, the network, which means if you have access to 2 applications in that network and there's 100 servers, if you do a network scan, you're probably going to see all 100 of those applications respond to an IP SYN request, which means you can see the open ports, which means if you're a malicious actor or if you have malicious software on your system, either on purpose or by accident, that malicious software can see those open ports. It can scan those open ports. It can do banner grabbing. It can detect what application is running, what version of that application, and possibly exploit something on the network, something that you as a user might not even have login credentials to, but you can see that open port, and that really opens up the attack surface. So that's the classical VPN. Zero trust network is when you connect to a zero trust network access solution, you are given pinhole access to the IPs and ports that you have permission to. So in the case of 100 servers running on the network and you have access to applications with a zero trust network access solution, you see those 2 IP addresses and the 2 ports or 1 port that you have access to on each one of those IPs. So if you do a full network scan of the entire network, you're going to see 2 IPs respond and 1 port for each of those IPs. So it's really a micro firewall per user to really limit that attack surface.
Now, is this something that if you use certain products, you kind of get for free, or is this something that needs to be set up intentionally and specifically every time?
This is definitely something that's intentional, and there's several different ways to do it. If you have a really mature DevOps pipeline in your cloud environment, you could do this with security groups. There's also quite a few products on the market on the zero trust network access side. There's products there, and that's usually targeted to people who want to run their own infrastructure. And then there's also cloud options. So you connect to a cloud access point, and the micro firewalls or the secure access is handled through a cloud provider. And that's attractive to some people because it is very easy. It's unattractive to other people because all of your traffic has to route through a cloud provider. So there's a little bit there's a level of trust there that you have to have in your cloud provider. And also, especially for on-site access, if you're routing all of your traffic for your on-site users out to the cloud and then back into your data center, you're essentially doubling your bandwidth, increasing your hops, increasing your latency. Mm-hmm. So there's pros and cons to each one.
Okay. And so many more developers are not working in the corporate office, whether they were and just a couple of years ago, they kind of went to a remote work from home situation, or of course, there's been a lot that have been doing that for years. Should developers be thinking about zero trust just for their production environments, or should they be thinking it for their own working environments as well?
I would say for all cloud environments, I would probably be an advocate for a zero trust access. If you're doing local development on your local computer, it's probably overkill. But what I've seen with the agility of being able to connect to a zero trust solution and having that integrate with, say, your Azure metadata or your AWS tags, you can, as a developer, you can get away from even worrying about IP addresses, and you can focus more on the metadata, more on the tags, and do your application discovery that way. So it takes some of the network knowledge, network administration, network overhead away from the developers. And if there's a common nomenclature for the metadata, they can focus on that, integrate that into the DevOps pipeline, and definitely gain a lot more agility. Also, if you're moving workloads from production to staging or staging to production, changing a tag, changing the metadata can automatically change your access. So if you don't want anybody touching anything in prod, you change that tag, automatically all that access is removed from the developers and it's in production. Change a different tag and it can come back to staging and grant developers access to it. So it's really the agility and the automation is what it brings to the table.
Now you said two words, metadata and tag. Can you expand on in the zero trust area? What exactly are those? What do they mean, and what do they look like?
So I'm going to use AWS terminology because that's where I spend most of my time.
Mm-hmm.
So in AWS, you say I spin up an EC2 instance to run a specific workload, and that EC2 instance can have a variety of tags. That could be, is it production? Is it development? Does it need SSH access? Does it need web access? And being able to read those tags dynamically when a user is needs to access their applications, I can discover all the EC2 instances that are tagged SSH and write an entitlement based on that. So if somebody is coming in with SSH admin access because they need to patch servers manually, I hope nobody's doing that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But they can connect to a service, dynamically resolve all of the IP addresses where the SSH tag is there, and immediately have access to all of those. If SSH is removed, say if that workload goes into production, those tags are changed, SSH is removed, production is added. Now nobody can SSH to that box because it's in production. It shouldn't change without a change request, which is going to add that SSH tag back to it. So it's really looking at the API on the AWS side, reading those tags and labels, dynamically resolving those two IP addresses so that you don't have to manage security groups for IPs anymore, because managing security based on IP, as soon as you make a change, it's stagnant. It's already stale.
Right. Okay. So, and yes, Azure supports tagging resources. AWS supports tagging resources. So you're saying literally just make up some certain tag. Now, aside, is there an industry standard for names of tags, or do you just have to come up with your convention?
Unfortunately, there is not an industry standard.
Okay.
So that would depend on the business and business use case.
Pending an industry standard, is there somebody who's gone through the exercise and just has published a favorite standard set of tags that someone could just adopt instead of starting at, inventing day one?
Not that I've seen.
Okay.
No, I mean, typically, if you tag resources with SSH, that usually equates to TCP port 22.
Yeah.
And if you tag it with HTTP, you can assume port 80, and likewise. So you can almost tag your workloads with a tag that equates to the protocol and port number that needs to be accessed on that workload.
Okay, almost like a tag, almost like using what service a resource can provide. Like this service can expose SSH. It can expose FTP or HTTPS.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's almost like using the tags and labels as almost as a service registry. So you're publishing those tags and labels through, say, the AWS API, and there's a different API that's going to go and connect to the AWS API to read those tags and labels. And it's sort of like the poor man's service mesh.
Okay. Now walk us through, you said somebody logs in, and is their user account tagged with SSH, or what bridges this dynamic process where, now they see all the things that can be, exposed via SSH?
Yeah, and this hits on another core tenet of zero trust, which is enterprise identity government, enterprise identity governance. So the user, the identity, and identity federation is huge, because if you don't have that identity governance in place, then what the issues that we had 10, 20 years ago, somebody leaves the company and their account's not disabled. Well, now it's somebody comes in, they're constantly changing roles, or they're changing jobs, or they're changing within the company. How do you enforce the governance on those identities? And especially as acquisitions and mergers happen, how do you integrate all of those separate, say, Active Directory forests or different architectures that aren't Active Directory into one identity that everything can use? So we're working towards single sign-on and augmenting, in Active Directory would be expanding the schema. Now with single sign-on, it's a lot easier to add attributes into the SAML assertions that are returned. And that's where the metadata for the users comes in. So almost the same type of tagging and labeling is available inside of SAML. So I would say, rely on that, rely on more integration. One of the more compelling integrations I've seen is a ServiceNow demo where a ticket is created. ServiceNow has integration into the Zero Trust Network Access platform. It can create an entitlement for a user that says this person at the help desk is authorized to go patch these three servers. The IP address is automatically discovered. The user is already there in ServiceNow because it uses the same backend identity management system. And as long as that ticket is open, that user has SSH access. As soon as that help desk person completes their patching, closes that ticket, their access is automatically removed. So it's really about that API integration and automation.
Okay. Aside from that automation, do the cloud providers already have this mechanism of automatically discovering via tags, or is there something that needs to be added to what they provide?
So what I work most with is, I call it an AWS resolver. And that's something that talks to the AWS API. And the information is there in the API. It's just a matter of getting it out and using it effectively.
Okay. And do you have typically go over HTTPS or command line, or both?
No, all that is an HTTPS API call to the AWS API.
Okay.
And typically that's done with in AWS, because that's where I live. EC2, you can give an EC2 instance a role, so it's allowed to query the AWS API for very specific things. So you lock that down so that it can go out, look at the tags and labels, discover the public IP addresses on your workloads. And workloads, that it's not just other EC2 instances, that could be load balancers or Kubernetes backends also.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
There's certainly big companies that have lots of developers, and they have lots of systems engineers and ops groups that handle the production access and whatnot. But then there are probably an order of magnitude or more mid-sized, smaller companies that don't have these dedicated big ops groups. The development team, they either all or some or maybe one person has production access, and okay, they can grant somebody else access. But what's normal in these more mid-sized companies is a certain person or persons has perpetual production access to, and I'll stick with cloud, to those Azure subscriptions, AWS accounts, and whatever is in those cloud accounts. And so moving from that, what are the steps for them to move to a zero trust paradigm?
First, I would say look at your team and how much you want to grow that. So I'll start with, say the really small example. Say you're a mom and pop shop. You don't even, you have your son that comes in once in a while to update your Windows box, and you don't have any IT staff. Mm-hmm. In that case, I would say look at something that's easy, something to get you started. And that's probably going to be a software as a service. So there's plenty of software as a service for zero trust network access and also secure access service edge. So those are the sort of two, I wouldn't say competing, the two complementary technologies. So if you want zero trust network access, that's connecting directly to your resources without a cloud routed model. And then the secure access service edge gives you a little bit more, say, layer 7 visibility, but everything's routed through the cloud through a different service provider.
Now, is that the name of a specific product or just a category?
No, those categories. Okay. And I think both Forrester and Gartner now have ratings for zero trust network access and then separately for secure access service edge or SASE.
Are there a lot of them there, or do you have a favorite product?
I guess I'll keep my professional or personal work biases out of this.
Okay.
But right. I would say, go look at the Gartner reports, go look at the Forrester reports. And, there's big players or small players. There's advantages to both. One of, say, the advantages to a massive player is, I'll drop Cisco's name. You can go pay Cisco for support anytime you want. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have IT staff in your company, or if you're a really small company, being able to leverage that support is nice. If you're a little bit larger company, but you want to work with a smaller zero trust network access company who's more agile, who's more willing to do development and product enhancements in order to achieve your goals, that's where, the availability and support from Cisco might be a hindrance, because unless you're going to pay them $2 billion, they're probably not going to do a lot of development for you and to enhance your company goals.
Okay.
So there's what's nice about the Forrester reports. I'm pretty sure it's Forrester, is they rank the company's maturity, the company's size, and where they fall on their capabilities and their offerings, as well as their maturity in the zero trust lifecycle.
Okay. So, all right. And so that's the mom and pop. So go up from maybe 10 developers in a mid-sized company, but maybe there's one, they call him the ops guy.
Yeah. And again, that depends on if you're doing primarily web-based or if you're doing web-based and database administration, virtual server administration. If everything's web-based, Google has developed a pretty outstanding model that they even use internally, which is BeyondCorp. So everything goes through a web proxy. There's a lot of layer 7 inspection that they can do there. For things that are not 100% web-based, that's where you need to look at something that does operate at the layer 3 model. So something that's easy would be a proxy-based solution like Google BeyondCorp, something that's a little bit more involved for a larger company that needs something other than a pure proxy solution would be a layer 3 solution. So a zero trust network access solution and not just a proxy solution.
Okay. Your observation of just this whole field, there's a lot of methods that get adopted by the early adopters and patterns fleshed out. And then companies implement products where then it becomes normal, and very few people are educated on the method anymore because a product just kind of does it and makes it sit in the background. What's your thought on the trajectory of this? Is it going to be something where no, people need to be educated in this constantly, or do you see consolidation into products and it just fading into the background at some point?
At this point, I've sort of seen a divergence in that there's one route that goes for maximum compatibility. So say if you want to ensure that anybody with a web browser can get to your product or service.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the proxy-based solution really comes in. But you are limited to the ports and protocols that you can connect with and service customers on. The other part that I've seen is a more enterprise solution where it's not just web-based. You do have a more focused identity governance model. And that's where the zero trust network access is coming in. So I've done a lot of work with the DoD, with the military, and I'm continuing that. And they are not going to use a cloud-routed solution. They're not going to use a proxy solution where they need to route all of their traffic through someone else's cloud. Same with really big customers, where if they lose a trade secret or if a exploit of a cloud-routed service model, if that could cause them to lose billions of dollars, they're going to look at that risk and they're going to say, it's not really worth it. I'm not going to risk losing billions. I'll pay a couple $100,000 for some really good network administrators.
Yeah.
That's where that divergence is taking place. And it really looks at how big is the company? What is their risk? For a mom and pop shop, what is their risk of adding more security? It adds a little bit of complexity.
Yeah.
But then as you get larger, what is the risk of adding that complexity and then depending on someone else as well?
Sure. So
and probably the biggest thing that I would point to, I think I might have mentioned this a couple of years ago, is one, moving towards single sign-on, moving away from stored passwords. So towards SAML, away from Active Directory whenever possible. It also allows much easier integration with external applications without having to expose your Active Directory to the internet. And then the second one is multi-factor authentication. So ideally, not SMS. SMS is better than nothing, but TOTP, FIDO, having those two can thwart a ton of attacks that we've seen in the past.
Now, TOTP, so many apps out there. Is that just the way it is? You're gonna have half a dozen or more of those apps, or do you see that on a trend towards consolidation?
So TOTP is, luckily that's a standard. So you can use Microsoft Authenticator, you can use Google Authenticator, you get your seed once. And there's also web pages and password managers that can manage your TOTP tokens as well.
So really just about the individual apps and the TOTP providers, about how, if they're going to give an option versus force their proprietary app to be used.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I use Google Authenticator personally, and it does get a little bit cumbersome once you have more than 20 or 30 different codes, rolling through those and being able to remember what you labeled each one.
Yeah. I think last time, the SMS and that little, if I remember correctly, you said on your cell phone, the door that opens the SIM card, you just put a little bit of cellophane tape or something over that door so that if it's been tampered, because that's still the only mechanism right now where people can hijack your SMS, or is there another one cropped up?
No, there's
more now.
Oh, yeah. I forget exactly what it's called, maybe SIM jacking. So there's I don't know what you want to call it. It's called a criminal cyber ring around people who will orchestrate SIM swapping, but virtually. So people who will run into a T-Mobile or an AT&T store and grab the manager's iPad and run out and know how to use it so that they can do SIM swapping until that iPad gets disabled. So, 5-ish years ago, that would be call into your providers, or I guess your target's provider's cell phone carrier, do some social engineering, say, hey, we just got married, I need to be added to their account. And then, maybe immediately after that, oh, my husband just dropped his cell phone in the toilet and he got a new one. Can you swap his SIM over? Can you swap his number over? And that's made a ton of news and lost people a ton of money because they used SMS for their multi-factor for, say, their crypto wallets or their crypto exchanges.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
I
if you
bet
get
that's a big target.
Absolutely. So if you move towards TOTP or hardware tokens, that's not something where a cell phone carrier can make a mistake and then you're out of money. That's something where, you can make a mistake and you can lose your hardware token and you can completely lose access, but it is absolutely more secure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, hey, as we get to the end of our time here, for a lot of developers, this is all fresh information. They don't spend their days thinking about network security or the data center or tagging resources and limiting access. But for those who realize, oh shoot, I need to dive into this. I need to understand this really. Are there any go-to resources that they should just immediately go over to that you're aware of? And we'll put any links in the show notes as well.
I think the big ones for the larger companies especially is look at the Executive Order 14028, which is improving the nation's cybersecurity. Also CISA, which
what is that? That was a fancy name of a document. Is that a government regulation or what was that?
That's a presidential executive order issued last May, so about a year ago.
Okay.
And it's around improving the nation's cybersecurity, and it does dive into zero trust, MFA, and other things.
Okay.
CISA, which is a fairly new government agency, it's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, established in 2003. They've got a lot of good documentation. And NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they are also focused on zero trust with a NCCOE, National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence project around that. And that's something that I'm a part of. And that's going to extend the SP 800-207 that they published a couple of years ago.
Okay.
So those are government entities, they don't have commercial interest. I'm not trying to point anybody necessarily towards a specific product, but look at what has matured to the point where the government is ready to embrace it. And that's going to be something where you're not going to be on the bleeding edge. There will be support. There will be architectures available.
Yeah. I guess we know that government's not really early adopters in the bleeding edge stuff.
Correct.
Well, awesome. I am very confident that you just stretched quite a few of our listeners' brains into the space. I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with us about zero trust networking. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Great to be here again. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.